happy to have as a special guest Dr. Killingly, who is a renowned Sanskrit scholar. And we thought, because Sridananda Maharaj is well known for his work around the topic of Mahabharata, that it would be a good opportunity to have a Mahabharata discussion forum. So I hope you're ready to ask your questions and when the opportunity comes around. Dr. Killingly is going to present on the topic of time and destiny in the Mahabharata, and he wants to outline the subject of the four yugas, and the idea that the war in Kurukshetra is the beginning of the Kali Yuga, and lead into questions of how that raises questions of the inevitability of evil, the idea of the progression of yugas and so on. And then Sridananda Maharaj wants to speak about correcting the Mahabharata, and he'll focus on the attempts of Madhvacharya from the 13th century and the Bhagavad Purana to correct the message of the Mahabharata. So Madhva justifies his correction by claiming that the Mahabharata text is thoroughly corrupt, and the Bhagavad Purana claims that the Mahabharata's author Vyasa intentionally dumbed down the work to attract materialistic people. So Maharaj wants to examine how both Madhva and the Bhagavad Purana respond, and then he wants to give his own views that inform his retelling of the Mahabharata, which is present in the form of this new book, Quest for Justice, which is available if anyone's interested. It's also available on Amazon, but we have some copies here that came in at the last minute, so if anyone's interested to get a copy of that book. That should take us from up until about 5 o'clock, and then we have a presentation running for about an hour or so, maybe a little bit less, from scholars in our local community who are engaged in research in various topics in the arts, and they'll just give a 10 minute presentation about what they're engaged in and open that up for any feedback or any discussion that anyone wants to give involving that. So I'd like to start in a customary way by bringing some garlands forward for our guests. Maybe if we can take these two garlands from Prabhupada and bring them forward. Is that Dr. Dermot Killingly will present first for about 20 minutes in his presentation, and then we'll ask Sridananda Maharaj to respond to that and open up the discussion for anybody else who has any questions or like that, and then we'll reverse roles. Maharaj will present on his topic, and then we'll ask Dermot to be a discussant for that, and then open it up to the rest of us to get our opportunity to ask any questions or have discussion. So that's the basic idea. And thanks again for coming. It's really nice to have this chance.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I'm just the warm-up man. I'm not a Mahabharata scholar the way Sridananda is. But I'm very happy to be here and contributing to this discussion, and I'm eager to hear not only what Sridananda has to say, but this very interesting topic of controversy over the Mahabharata and its interpretation and questioning its authenticity and so on. And I'm also be interested to hear the presentations from other scholars because they must be relevant to the Mahabharata too, because there's a verse in the Mahabharata that says that everything that is found anywhere in the is found in the Mahabharata, and what is not found in the Mahabharata is not found anywhere. So whatever topic you're going to talk about, it will be relevant to the Mahabharata. But the one I'm going to talk about is time, which is a subject which, of course, is talked about all through Hindu culture. There's a lot about it in Mahabharata, there's a lot about it in Bhagavad Purana and other Puranas and in the laws of Manu. And the word Kala, time, which is the most general word for time, also means death. The time of death, in a sense, is the most important time of your life, because it's the time when whatever you do, you can't do anything further about it. And it's death, of course, is time catching up with you. You have your time and you spend it well or badly, but eventually this most important time will happen. But time is measured, of course, not only by human lifetimes, but by cycles which we observe in the world. The most obvious one is the day. There is the day that alternates with night, and that cycle goes on all the time. But there's also the year. The day and the year are both measured by the sun, but of course the year is much longer, consisting of, depending how you reckon it, nowadays we reckon it as 365 days, except when it's 366. But the ancient Indian way of reckoning it is 360 days. That is in order to accommodate 12 lunar months. And obviously, if you count 360 days, after a time it gets out of sync with the sun. One result of this is that we've just passed, for Muslims, we have just passed the Eid al-Fitr, the end of the Ramadan fast, which happens in June this year, but next year it will happen a bit earlier, because and last year it happened later, and sometimes it happens in winter. It doesn't always happen in midsummer, because the Islamic calendar works by counting 12 lunar months, and after 12 lunar months, that's the end of the year. Whatever the solar year is doing, whether it's summer or winter or autumn or spring, 12 lunar months marks the complete year. And so the Islamic year is shorter, is shorter than the solar year, which is what we work on in the international calendar. The Hindu tradition, in fact, has a way of following the lunar system and the solar system and counting 12 lunar months, but every 3 or 4 years fitting in an extra month, just as the international calendar slips in an extra day, the 29th of February, to keep the calendar in phase with the sun. And the day and the lunar month and the year are not only ways of measuring time so that you can find a date in your diary and that kind of thing, but each part of them has its characteristics. Obviously, we have day and night, one is bright, one is dark. But we have the twilights, which are, anything on a borderline is dangerous, and twilight is a dangerous time. And that's why you have to defend it by reciting the Sandhya, the Om Bhuvasva Tatsa Vatu Vraniam Bhagavad Devasya Divahi Diyo Yonah Chodayat. That is a very ancient prayer addressed to the sun, and its purpose is to mark the Sandhya, which means the twilight, and also to defend it against the dangers which beset it. The lunar month is less obvious nowadays than it is traditionally, because we have so much artificial light that moonlight doesn't matter very much to us. But in all countries, until artificial light became very general in the 19th century, it was usual to travel at night only if there was a full moon. And you avoided travelling at any other time because you wouldn't have enough light and travel would be more dangerous. But Indian culture, Hindu culture, extrapolates from these cycles of time which interlock with each other, and says that there are larger cycles of time, which are the system of yugas. And the original idea probably was that the Mahayuga was 360 years in the same way as a year is 360 days. But from that, they worked out a much bigger cycle in which they took account of the idea that the gods have a different scale of time from what we have. Because a day of the gods is one of our years. And the ancestors also have their day, which is one of our lunar months. So with gods, ancestors and people, you have three different timescales. The gods obviously live longer than we do, so they can reckon time in much bigger units. But interlocking with this is the idea of 4 ages, which is an idea that you get in ancient Greek culture as well. But it's developed in a particular way in Hindu culture. You have 4 ages of decreasing length and decreasing quality. The reckoning ages is based on the number 12, and which is a number that you find when you match the lunar months to the year, of course. And that's why the number 12 comes into reckonings of larger units of time. And you have periods of decreasing length, 400, 300, 200 and 100. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but 4, 3, 2 and 1 add up to 10. So that gives you a cycle of 10, but to make it up to 12, you add twilights, so that each of the 4 yugas, 4 ages, is not just 400 years, then 300, then 200, then 100, but 440, 330, so now, sorry, 4,400, 373, and so on. And this comes to a very long period of time when you think that the years we're talking about are not human years, but years of the gods. And the system of 4 ages gives you a picture of decline or fall, but rather like the fall that's told about in the story of the Garden of Eden, except there you just have one fall. In the system of 4 yugas, you have graded falling. You have the perfect age, which is the Krita Yuga, and Krita means perfect or perfectly made. And then the Treta Yuga, which is not so good and shorter, and the Dvapara, which is again not so good, and then Kali. And one verse in the Laws of Manu says that Dharma is complete in the Krita age, but you only have 3/4 of Dharma in the Treta age, and then half of Dharma, and now we've only got 1/4 of Dharma. Or since the word for quarter also means foot, you can say that Dharma is standing on 4 feet in the perfect age, then on 3 feet, then 2 feet. Now it's only got 1 foot to stand on. So Dharma is precarious in the present age. And it wasn't very good in the previous age either. Now, the events of the Mahabharata happened at the twilight between the Dvapara age and the Kali age. We are now in the Kali age. It started in terms of the international calendar, 4302 BC. And it's got a long way to run. There are still thousands of centuries before you get to the end of the Kali age. I won't do all the maths, but it is, you can calculate. So it's no use waiting for the world to get better, it's going to get worse. And the ages are also associated with the avatars, and Krishna is the avatara who brings about the beginning of the Kali age. And then during the Kali age, you have Buddha as an avatara. And at the end of the Kali age, to restore Dharma again, Kalki who comes, who is either a man riding on a white horse, or in some versions he is a white horse, but you'll have to wait a few thousand centuries before you find out which. Now, this brings us to the events of the Mahabharata. The war which happens in Kurukshetra is a great disaster. It marks the beginning of the Kali age, when everything is bad, and there are many descriptions in the Mahabharata and in the Puranas about how bad the Kali age is. Various things are bad about it. Dharma isn't followed properly because it's only standing on one foot. The Brahmins aren't proper Brahmins. They just get fat and this has been just to something that is important for Islam, of course. True Brahmins are Brahmins because of their qualities and not because of their birth. And there's very ancient controversy about whether it's birth or behaviour and knowledge that make a Brahmin. And of course, one of the things that make ISKCON slightly at odds with the way many Hindus think it is Dharma is that it actually has Brahmins who are not Brahmins by birth. But anyway, the battle at Kurukshetra is a terrible event, and it is described as such in the Mahabharata, and although there's a lot of very heroic stuff in the description of the battle, as if warriors actually enjoy killing each other, even if they don't like it when they get killed themselves. After the battle, there's great lamentation and descriptions of blood all over the place, which makes it quite clear that the battle is a great disaster. But here I come to the question of destiny. Is it a disaster that had to happen? According to the idea of the four yugas, it did have to happen. And this brings us to the question of the morality of the heroes who do many nasty things in the course of the battle. They start the battle by saying they're going to obey certain rules of engagement, and as soon as the battle starts, they contravene these rules and hit below the belt and so on. And Krishna encourages this sort of thing. Now, this makes Krishna appear to be an agent of evil, but is he? Or is it just that he knows that evil is going to come because its time has come? One thing one has to be clear about the cyclic nature of time in Hindu thought is that the cycles don't mean that exactly the same thing happens every time the cycle goes through. It's just like days and years. You know that at this time of year the days have been getting longer, but now they're going to get shorter. You know that the crops are going to ripen, but you don't know how well they ripen because you don't know whether the rain will come at the right time or the wrong time. And with days and nights, you may have a good rest and wake up feeling great, or you may wake up feeling a bit stupid, or you may wake up feeling absolutely horrible. So, although the cycle is there, you wake up and you stagger through the day, or you have a wonderful day, the actual events of the cycle differ from day to day and from year to year. And they differ from Mahayuga to Mahayuga as well. So although certain general patterns of events are going to happen in every Mahayuga, they happen differently in different Mahayugas. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says quite a lot about time. And he says in the great vision in chapter 11, which terrifies Arjuna, he says, I am time, and I am time which has matured to destroy all these creatures. So, and destroy all these people who are going to be destroyed in the battle. And remember that Kala, time, means death as well. So when he says, I am time matured to destroy these people, he's also saying, I am death, which is matured to destroy these people. Their time of death has come. And he then says that even without you, these will be destroyed. So he's telling Arjuna that the destiny of these people is to be killed, and what Arjuna decides about it won't make any difference. Now that addresses the problem which Arjuna states at the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2 Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna realizes that he is about to fight his relatives and his elders and his gurus. I don't know why he hadn't worked that out before, but it suddenly occurs to him when he sees all these people. And the whole of the Bhagavad Gita is directed towards overcoming this difficulty, because Arjuna is there to fight. Then at the end of chapter 1 he says, I'm not going to fight. At the beginning of chapter 2 he goes on saying, I'm not going to fight. And Krishna has to turn him around and say he will fight, which he does in chapter 2 with various arguments. And, it seems as the chapters go on that the arguments are having less and less to do with what Krishna is worried about, although what Arjuna is worried about, although Krishna does from time to time teach an argument by saying, therefore fight Arjuna. But when it gets to chapter 18, the last chapter, this is the real crux of the Gita. This is where Arjuna's question is simply overridden by saying, and he says it in chapter 11 as well, that you are going to fight, and in chapter 18 he says the people are like puppets on a machine. They haven't really got free will. Now, this question of free will is worrying. The idea that we don't have free will is I used to want to be a determinist, but it wasn't to be. I can't help believing in free will. So fate has made me believe in free will. But what Krishna actually tells Arjuna, I think, although it doesn't say it quite so explicitly, is that his actions are determined, but his will is free. The only choice Arjuna has is to fight willingly which is what Krishna is urging him to do, or to fight unwillingly, which is what Arjuna's nature will make him do. So there will be a mismatch between Arjuna's will and what Arjuna does, and he will fight in a conflicted sort of way. But if he listens to Krishna's arguments, as eventually he does, then he will fight in a harmonious way in which his will and his actions work together. So that is some brief ideas about time and destiny in the Bhagavad Gita, but time is catching up with me, so I think I have to hand over to Vilayananda to make what he can of what I've been saying.
I'd like to thank Dermot for his contribution. And now I'd like to hand over to His Holiness Sri Dandana Maharaj as the first discussant of Dermot's topic, and then after that we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions or give any opinions also.
Thank you, Professor. Oh, so thank you all for coming. I'll make a few points in reply to the professor. Regarding kala, or time, there's a Sanskrit verb, kal, just with a short a, which means to drive something or impel something. Just one simple example in H.D.Goswami's famous poem, that a series of verses that end Jaya Jagadisha Hare, the Dashavatar Stotra, I guess it's called. When he describes Kalki, whom the professor mentioned, who you don't want to be here when Kalki comes. If you're here when Kalki comes, you stay too long. So, but in the description of Kalki, Jayadeva writes, Kalayasi Karavalam, that Kalki will wield a sword. So this is the person on horse rather than the horse theory of Kalki. But Kalayasi Karavalam, he will wield a sword. So I mentioned that just one example of the verb kal, which some people, of course, want to separate from the word kala, but I think they kind of go together. But the idea of driving, impelling, and so in the Mahabharata, and also, of course, in the Gita, and in general, kala or time is, but isn't only, as the professor pointed out, a system of measurement. Whether it's don't want to go through the whole list, seconds, multi-seconds, minutes, hours, and so on, up to great yugas, maha, divya yugas, whatever. So it's not only a system of measurement, it's actually the force that drives people through this medium. I know in Western philosophy, there's been a lot of discussion on time with no real conclusion. You could say is it a medium through which events take place, and so on. Just like space, you could say is a medium. So, but here in the Gita and in the Mahabharata, there's let me make a reference to a famous statement in the Vedas, Tadaikshita, that he, the creator, the Lord, glanced over nature and, in a sense, activated. In the Bhagavad Purana, there's the notion of the Pradhana and the Mahatattva. The Pradhana being all of matter, the entire conglomerate of material energy, but when it's entirely inert, it doesn't act. In other words, fire doesn't burn, water doesn't wet. It's simply inert. We also read in the Gita, Bhuta, Bhuta, Praliyate, there are creation cycles, that time is not simply a unidirectional time arrow, but actually time moves in cycles, a concept that other ancient cultures had. And so, and as the professor pointed out, it doesn't mean that we have to repeat the same life, which I'm really happy about, because I don't want to have exactly the same indigestion I had earlier today. But so it's not that exactly the same things happen, but rather the same seasons. You can think of these as cosmic seasons, like summers are basically summers, though each one's different. So according to the Bhagavad Purana, in between creation cycles, when the creation is withdrawn, then those souls that could not join the Hare Krishna movement, or those souls who couldn't achieve spiritual perfection, and didn't achieve liberation, moksha, are then withdrawn into the body of Mahavishnu, and then they come out again. A fact which leads some people, I think, to incorrectly philosophize that our original position is within Mahavishnu, but that's another point. So, it's said that when this glance takes place, that the Lord glanced there, I think in the Vedas it says, Ekok San Bahusham, being one, I shall be many, or let me be many, in the sense of God, like us, having sort of a social nature and manifesting other souls. But what's interesting here is that if you compare this pradana, which is this completely inert matter, just matter and then when the Lord glances over it, it said that glance is actually Kala Shakti. It's the power of time. And when this time enters this inert matter, that's when matter becomes activated and actually starts to interact and things start to happen. So, and it's also said that this glance of Kala Shakti, through this glance, the Lord impregnates nature. That's sort of this procreative imagery, which you also find in the Gita, where Krishna says, Aham bija pradakpita, I'm the seed-giving father. That Prakriti is Joni, it's the womb, or the receptacle, and then I'm the seed-giving father. So Krishna in the Gita refers to this this procreative act, you could say cosmic procreation, where the souls are inserted into matter. And so why is it that this glance of Kala Shakti, first I want to connect three things. Number one, the fact that it's the Kala Shakti, it's the power of time, and in a sense it consists of placing souls again within a new coming material creation. That's what activates matter. The idea is that, I guess the teleology here would be that the whole purpose of having a universe in the first place, like you could say, why bother? Even having a material universe, if there is Vaikuntha, if there is a spiritual world. And that is because it's sort of a virtual reality machine that the souls come in and take their best shot at enjoying, you could say, without God. And so that is a persistent doorbell.
For whom the bell tolls.
Yeah, it's one of the features, I guess, of this area, but persistent doorbell. So the idea is that since the purpose is to give souls a chance to kind of work their way through every possible form of material enjoyment and hopefully come at the end of the conclusion that my real happiness is spiritual, not material, certainly. Therefore, when a creation cycle ends, when a universe ends and is going to be withdrawn, there are lots of souls that didn't really graduate yet. And so what do you do with the souls that didn't graduate? And there's no social promotions out of the universe. So if you go into the sense of what karma is really all about, their destiny, if you could use that word, is based on their own desires or wishes, and this is a point, of course, the professor mentioned, the free will, and the exercise of free will. So I'm going to, just for the moment, saying that, assume there is free will for the purpose of this argument. I agree with the professor. It would ruin my whole day if I found out I didn't have free will. So these, I mean, if you get into the whole karma theory of karma bija, that the reactions to our previous actions exist in seed form and they fructify, and so in that sense, a soul somehow contains within himself or herself all these coming reactions, all these built-up desires, basically all the existential momentum that the soul has built up, and which has to be worked out in the creation. So when the soul is launched or placed within this inert pradhana, the soul's destiny, which has to be worked out, because karma means that I act in a certain way and then the material universe or nature will respond to me, and that response takes me into another body and takes me into various circumstances and experiences, and all kinds of things happen to me because of karma. So all of this potential, all of this destiny, all of these, you could say, psycho-karmic causal chains that have to be manifested, they all get thrown into nature. And therefore nature is brought to life, because nature lives in a sense, or nature acts in order to facilitate, in order to bring about this whole process of action and reaction of karma. And so it kind of brings nature to life, because that's what nature is, It's like, imagine if I was a butler, probably unlikely in this life, but if I was a butler, and then you see this, I love old English movies. I can give another talk on old English movies. But anyway, they had this system where there was a butler, and then they would ring a bell and it would ring in the butler's room, and the butler would be activated and come and do his job. So it's kind of like that, it's like the bell rings and nature has to wake up and do its job. And so but getting back to my point about Kala, that not only as the medium of time or different stages or measurements of time, but actually the force that drives things to their destiny. And of course the ultimate destiny of everything in the universe is its own destruction. Therefore, sometimes you find in the Mahabharata this sort of poetic statement that Kala dharma ato digat, that the Kala dharma, in this old sense of dharma, the nature of something, the essential character of something, that the Kala dharma overcame someone. In other words, the person died. And of course Krishna says that, as the professor quoted, Kalosmi loka kshayakrit, and so on. So as far as free will, last thing, because I'm probably over time now, but so time is not only the medium through which events take place, but actually the force that drives things, their destiny. And regarding free will, the verse that the professor referred to, where Krishna says, Ishvarak sarva bhutanam hrideshe arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani jantarudhani maya. And Krishna uses the present causative participle, which is very dear to all of you. The word brahmayan, which literally means causing something to wander. Causing something to wander. And so Krishna says causing bhutas, sarva bhutani, and I've explained this word bhuta in my Gita just very, very quickly, that the word bhu in Sanskrit, this sort of number one verb, first case verb, who can mean to be, but also to become, to come to be. And therefore, the word bhuta, you can take literally as something which has come to be, in the sense I'm using the word. And so it's very interesting in the Gita that Krishna uses certain Sanskrit words to refer both to himself and to souls, such as Purusha or Atma, and so on. But the word bhuta, Krishna only uses for us, the jivas, and he never refers to himself as a bhuta, because the idea is Krishna has never come to be. Now, of course, Krishna also says that we've always existed. So we've always existed. So what does it mean? So why does Krishna call us Bhuta? Not calling us ghosts here, by the way, is another sense. Because what has come to be, and what is therefore a Bhuta, is not the soul, because Krishna says very clearly, souls have always existed. So what comes to be, in a sense, is a persona, which is the Dehi, the soul in a body. And that persona, it's like I'm the soul now doing business as, an American male, DBA. So that persona, that role I play, which is the Dehi, the soul in body, the soul in a body, that comes to be. And so that's the Bhuta. And since, according to Vaishnava theology, of course, and I've made it my argument in the Gita based on, I think, linguistic evidence, just examining how Krishna uses key words like words for body, words for person, for soul, and Krishna even at one point in the Gita refers to his own body as divyam and achintyam, a divine body, that if you, from the point of view of Vaishnava theology, that God is a spiritual form ultimately, and therefore Krishna also never refers to himself in the Gita as Dehi, one in the body, one who has a body. So he never calls himself Dehi, calls us Dehi a lot, but nothing personal. And he also calls us Bhuta a lot, but never himself, although other words he does use for himself and us. Because if Krishna, along this theory, would be consistent with his statement that he has a divine body, that his persona as someone, appearing as a body, does not come to be, and he's not in his body, but he is his body. It's a divine body. But in any case, so that verse, it says that Krishna is causing bhutas to wander, and he used that specific Sanskrit word bhuta. In other words, he's causing conditioned souls and bodies to wander. And I would argue, but not here, because my time's up, that it's not really a rejection of free will. Although the professor did actually explain how, we do have the choice of how we're going to deal with, you could say, inevitable events. And I think Krishna really goes through that dual causality in one Gita verse where he says, Karya karana kartartve hetur prakriti uchate. That in the matter of karyam, effect, and karanam, cause, they say effect and cause. Effect, cause, and agency. Karya karana kartartve. Krishna says hetu, or the reason, or the cause. Prakriti uchate is said to be prakriti, or nature. So there's a sense in which nature, sort of by its own sophisticated mechanisms, is bringing events about. Krishna alludes to the same thing in the Gita when he says, Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tattva, a knower of tattva, which of course means the basic categories of existence, such as nature, souls, and God. That a knower of tattva, yukta, when engaged or when connected through yoga, in other words, sort of spiritually connected, knows that even as I engage in so many activities, I'm actually not doing anything at all. Na eva kinchit karomi. So in that verse also, there's the idea of nature acting, whereas the soul is witnessing those actions, not really doing anything physically, because the soul is not the physical body. And then Krishna says that Prakriti is the cause, if we're talking about physical or material cause, effect, and agency. But Purusha, which means the soul in this world, Purusha Sukha Dukkha Nam Bhoktirtve, in the experiencing, literally. I mean, you could say in the enjoyment of bhoktir, but it's you don't enjoy your misery. So I think in this case that verb means to experience. So in the experiencing of happiness and unhappiness, sukha dukkha nam, that the cause is the purusha sukha dukkha nam bhoktir tve hetu ruchate, that the person or the soul in this world is said to be the cause of his or her own happiness and distress. So you do get that picture there of two levels of causality. Nature kind of mechanically causing things to happen, and we causing our own happiness or distress by how we respond to what nature is doing. Krishna's statement that a connected soul that knows the truth knows that I'm not doing anything at all as the body's moving. But I think that, again, Krishna explains that, I mean, very clearly in his Guna Vichar, Triguna Vichar, in his analysis of the three gunas, that in fact we are responsible for our actions. And so in that sense, it's like if you go to a soft drink dispenser, something that sannyasis do every day. So if you go to a soft drink dispenser, I don't know, do you put coins anymore? You insert your credit card, do something. And then, if you press this button or that button or the other button, the machine acts, but you did make a choice, and therefore you are responsible. And so I think in terms of the most fundamental moral philosophy, we could not be held responsible for our own happiness and distress unless somehow or other we were responsible for nature acting in a certain way, because we could hardly be the cause of our own suffering and enjoyment, I think, if we are totally have nothing to do with what nature actually did. And so when Krishna says to Arjuna at the end that Yatecha Sita Kuru, now do as you wish, I believe there is a sense there and throughout the Gita that the soul actually does make choices. Although we're not the body moves under its own. In fact, Krishna says, Mayadhyakshina, actually by my literally supervision, that's the Latin or the Germanic would be oversight. Adya Aksha. By my oversight or by my supervision, nature is working. So nature has its own, you could say, autonomy. Ultimately, it works under Krishna. We make choices that activate nature, just as the original entrance of the soul into the pradhana activates the totality of matter. And so that's the original cosmic, you could say, triggering or activating of nature. And then within our own body, we activate certain things. So I would vote with the professor for free will. So thank you all very much.
So at this point, I'd like to ask if anyone amongst us had any questions they'd like to ask, or any points that they would like to pick up on from the discussion so far.
It's actually to you, yes, to start with. You did speak about yugas. You did also speak about the time of the yugas, 400, 4,000, doesn't matter. So, but the first question here is, and also you spoke about dharma.
Yeah.
It's that the 4 legs, now we are in single leg, so.
Yeah.
Is it not that every single yuga peaks up like an S-curve, and then again starts on level 1,
Yeah.
Because otherwise, after the war in Mahabharata, I presume it was peaceful.
Well,
I don't know, I presume, So again, it started somewhere in Kali Yuga on a normal standard basis, and then again it started to peak somewhere. We don't discuss the peaking if it's good or not, but somewhere it's peaking, so it's like an S-curve. Everything which happens materially happens on an S-curve, scientifically. So we all peak at some stage and we all retire at some stage. You all also start something. In that case, all 4 yugas should have had ended with a war, ended with the Gita, We don't know. Still. Or, to contradict that, is just because in Indian or Hinduistic scriptures there are contrary information. One says time is eternal, another says if time is eternal, then why would this yugas? Why do we classify this as yugas? So why do we divide time? So there should be a cause to divide time. And if you take the Einstein relativity principle, time is eternal for him, but if you put a context in time, then it's plus or minus, So there is a unit to compare, So your logic seems to be right and also seems to be wrong. Sorry, yes.
Cover all the bases.
Yes, this is one thing about the 4 yugas idea is that it is different from the cycle of years and the cycle of days and the cycle of lunar months, because with the year you get a gradual brightening and a gradual darkening, and the same with the day, and with the lunar months you get the gradual waxing and waning of the moon. But with the yugas, what you get is 4 stages of decline, and at the end of the 4th you go right up to the top again. So it's not that sort of a graph, but it's that sort of graph. Yeah? if you can draw it like that, which is odd. And I must say, it's different from the way a lot of Hindu thought about time goes, because I think Hindu thought about time is an extrapolation of the observable rhythms we have of the year and the month and the day. But the yuga seems to be something different from what we observe, because of the way it goes back to perfection when it's finished declining. It seems to go back to perfection immediately, or at least very quickly, as quick as it can. But this is that when Kalki comes at the end of the Kali Yuga, then the perfect age will be restored. So that's different from the sort of cycles we observe. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Anyone else with any further questions or points to make on this topic?
Yes, I have a couple of things actually. You were talking at the beginning of your talk about controversies regarding the Mahabharata. I just wondered if there's a big controversy regarding actually the factuality of the history of the Mahabharata, because it seems to refer to a very advanced civilization, people were very knowledgeable in different sciences. I mean, you even have an instance of talking about Vimana, about aeroplanes. So this seems to fly in the face of generally modern historians' idea about what ancient civilizations are about. So I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, it's partly the way the Mahabharata is told, that it does. I'm not sure about aeroplanes, but certainly it talks about glass, which is a product of fairly advanced civilization. But the story about glass involves somebody not knowing what glass is, and when he comes to the wonderful palace with glass floors and so on, he doesn't know whether he's walking on water or what, because he's never seen this stuff before. But so that's one example of a bit of advanced culture which has come into the narrative of the Mahabharata. As for aeroplanes, certainly talk about Vimana, and Vimana has been adopted in modern languages to mean an aeroplane. That is the ordinary Vimana, is the ordinary Hindi word for aeroplane. But whether it always meant an aeroplane in days when, from the point of view of what's usually recognised as history, there weren't any aeroplanes. Certainly Vimanas were the chariots of the gods, or the dwellings, or mobile dwellings of the gods. They're talked about in the Veda. But that doesn't mean that there are actual aeroplanes. That's one way of looking at it.
Is that generally modern historians' perspective on that?
Yes.
That they weren't
but
it was just an allegory or something like that.
Yeah. Or it didn't mean what it means in modern time. The example of Viman, that certainly Viman was talked about, but it doesn't have to mean what it means now. So just when aeroplanes came, then somebody thought it would be a good idea to call them Viman, using this ancient word for the mobile homes of the gods.
I I would see that as a perversion personally.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was when you were saying that Krishna, he allowed unethical practices. He approved of them during the fighting on the Battle of Kurukshetra.
Yeah.
My reading of the Mahabharata doesn't tally with that necessarily, because it doesn't seem to me that Krishna was actually always involved in approving ethical or unethical behaviour during the course of the Battle of Kurukshetra. It seemed to me that if that were deemed to be the case, then it would actually people could use it as an excuse not to accept Krishna's divinity, just in the same way that they do the same when we talk about Krishna having affairs with the gopis. Then they say, oh, he's immoral.
Yeah.
So it seems to be the same way that people would say that, oh, Krishna approved of all these unethical practices which happened on the Battle of Kurukshetra, but as I say, he wasn't necessarily always involved in approving those things or not approving them.
Yeah, well, Krishna is obviously within Vaishnavism. Krishna is not a controversial figure, but with taking the Hindu tradition as a whole, Krishna is a controversial figure. As you say, people, non-Vaishnavas, will point to his sex life, and they'll also point to his policies in the Mahabharata. Yeah. So these are two conflicting views of Krishna.
I think
So you'll go to...
for purposes of time, we might need to move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
Does anyone have one burning question to finish on?
Has to really be on fire.
So at this point, I would like to ask Hridayananda Maharaj to lead us in a discussion.
I'll think about it. Okay, thank you, Professor, for your answers to those questions. Actually, I'm going to touch upon this topic which you brought up about the mischievous Krishna, and the fact that, as Professor said, there was controversy within the Hindu tradition. Evidence is found in the Bhagavatam, because in the 10th canto, Shuka, great speaker Shuka, says, actually Parikshit says to Shuka, no less a figure than the great Parikshit, says to Shuka, why did Krishna dance with all these girls? Because I thought he came down to establish Dharma. So that question is raised actually in the Bhagavatam, and in response, Shuka basically makes the distinction that, as we would phrase it today, the difference between following and imitating. And he says that Krishna, that if great souls, if great personalities do something and instruct you to do it, then you can do it. But if they do it themselves and don't instruct you to do it, then you shouldn't do it. That would be imitation, and that such activities don't actually contaminate great figures. But there is a discussion of that even in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, so it's been an issue for a very long time. I want to talk about Mahabharata and what do we do with the Mahabharata? In the sense that the Mahabharata, if you look at the Bhagavatam talks about the Mahabharata. That discussion begins in the chapter 5 of the first canto, Prathamaskanda, when, as we know, Veda Vyasa, after doing all this monumental work, dividing the Vedas and composing the great Mahabharata, is actually sort of discouraged and unsatisfied. His guru comes, Narada Muni, and says, you kind of messed up here. And he explains that Vyasa made too many concessions in writing what we would call, Karma Kanda or Karma Kandiya literature, and now tell the real story, and then Vyasa goes into Samadhi and produces the Bhagavatam. But it's interesting, the the word that in Sanskrit that that Narada uses when he describes this, what Vyasa has done, he says jugupsitam. So if you look up jugupsitam in the dictionary, it means abominable, terrible. And so when he says jugupsitam dharma krite, for the sake of dharma, anushasitam, this teaching that you gave, and he says it's mahan vyatikrama, literally a great transgression, vyatikrama. So even back in the Bhagavatam, we find that that Narada himself, Vyasa's guru, has serious misgivings about what Vyasa has done, and that would include Mahabharata. So the controversy, like the Mahabharata, did it really tell the story correctly? Or did, for example, in the Mahabharata, you find that everyone is basically a sort of a karma, kanda person. The very thing that in the Gita, Krishna says, Veda, talks about the Veda Vada Ratas, the people that just speak the words of the Vedas but totally miss the point of the Vedas. Or Krishna even criticized the Vedas, Trigunya Vishaya Veda, that the subject matter of the Vedas is basically life in the three modes of nature, Triguna, and Nis Trigunya Bhavarjuna. Arjuna, you should live beyond these three gunas. In other words, you have to go beyond the Vedas. And of course, Krishna, that famous verse where Krishna says, Tadagantasi nirvedam. One of the nice little puns in the Gita. The word nirveda can mean indifferent, like I don't even want to know about it, nirveda. But also it can mean literally Vedaless. And when Krishna says that when you're yadate moha kalilang buddhir vyati tarishasi, when your intelligence goes beyond this sort of this thicket of illusion, of bewilderment, tada, then gantasi, paraphrastic future for Sanskrit grammar fans, then you will go tada gantasi nirvedam, Vedaless. And shota vyasya, and you will be indifferent, nirveda, to shota vyasya, that which is to be heard, and shrutasya cha, that which has been heard. And of course, shruta and shotavya are nothing more than references to the Vedas, which are shruti. So Krishna again in chapter 9 talks about, Trividya, those who study the three Vedas, leaving out kind of like the sort of voodoo Veda, the Atharva. If you look at the four Vedas, the Rig, Sama, and Yajur Vedas, and Krishna refers them there as a Trividya, those who have the knowledge of the three. Somapa, the Soma drinkers. So if you were wondering, is Krishna really talking about people who study the three Vedas? He clears that up by saying, the Soma drinkers. Kind of reminds you of Brave New World, doesn't it? Brave New Vedic World. So, the Soma. So, Trividya, Somapa, Putapapa, who purified themselves from at least their gross sins, Swargating Partayante, they aspire for Swarga. And Te Punya Masani. Anyway, so, of course, Swargating Partayante. As you know, if you look at Mimamsa philosophy, the sort of the super karmakanda technocrats, the ritual technocrats, and I remember when I studied that at Harvard, the great slogan of the Mimamsas was Swarga Kamo Yajeta. One who wants to go to the material heaven must offer sacrifice. Swarga Kamo Yajeta. So I bring all this up because if you look at the Mahabharata, that's what everybody's doing. The Pandavas want to go to heaven, and everybody wants to go to Swarga. No one is in the Mahabharata, at least in the main body of the text, apart from some special prayers you find here and there, where you get some more serious theology. But in the main body of the text, no one really is buying their ticket for Vaikuntha, a spiritual world. Everybody just wants to get to Swarga. And to make matters worse, when everyone finally gets to Swarga, there's Duryodhana. And so, to me, there's a real problem here. I have a real problem here because the message we're getting is, hey, I won't be like, grossly American and say, hey dudes, but it's a message to kings that, hey, if you're a king, you can kill, rape, usurp, steal, Do what you want. Just make sure you die on the battlefield. So basically, there are really no moral requirements for going to heaven. There are no moral requirements to go to heaven. Just die on a battlefield. That'll do it. But, I mean, I struggled with some of this stuff in the Mahabharata. And what I found very liberating is a book I read, the part of it, by Sripad Madhavacharya, or Madhvacharya, the great Vaishnavacharya from southwest India, who wrote a book on Mahabharata called Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, which means figuring out what the Mahabharata means. And it's very interesting because he specifically says in this book, and this is what I found liberating, that the Mahabharata text, the Sanskrit text available to him approximately 800 years ago, actually is roughly contemporary with Thomas Aquinas, but won't comment further on that. But anyway, he says there that the Mahabharata Sanskrit text is thoroughly corrupted. Thoroughly corrupt. And he points out 3 corruptions, which are the same ones, any scholar would do nowadays. Interpolations, someone stuck something in the text that wasn't originally there. Extrapolations, somebody took something out of the text. And transpositions of text, getting things out of order. Now, if you actually sit down and read the whole Mahabharata, then almost no one ever does, because there's like 3 million summaries of it. But if you actually read the whole Mahabharata, it's obvious what Madhavacharya is speaking about. And so, one more point. I want to mention a few other points of problems I had with the Mahabharata. And the upshot of all of this, because, of course I'm doing everything in my power to create an internal controversy in the Hare Krishna movement, but just kidding, I don't have to try it. I become so good at it that it's effortless. But 2 other points that I'm just not satisfied with, and I felt that Madhavacharya was authorizing me as a true believer Vaishnava to think. That's pretty radical, but I actually felt I was authorized to think about this. And so one thing that, and again, but I was thinking within boundaries. It's like if you're a scientist in some field, physics or whatever, biology, you can speculate and think, but there are boundaries. There's a scientific method. And scientists don't do a lot of meta thinking about methodology because they generally don't take philosophy courses. But so therefore there is kind of a general agreement on what the rules are in terms of good science and bad science. So in our, what we call a spiritual science, we also have certain epistemological and methodological boundaries. And so I was actually thinking within those boundaries. Please believe me, I'm not a bad person. So I began to think about issues in the Mahabharata that really bothered me. And here are some of them. For one, this is something actually I was sort of tipped off by the great scholar from Chicago, Ved Boynton, who translated a part of the Mahabharata. And I was reading his introduction to one of those volumes, and he said something which really made me think. And that is, the professor alluded to this also, that in the Mahabharata, I feel, and again, when I say Mahabharata now, I'm not talking about the original Mahabharata, which according to Vishnu, Suktankar, and the other great scholars who did the critical edition, we can't really recover. That, let's say if originally it was an oral traditions are notoriously unstable and they go all over the place. And so by the time the Mahabharata is written down, which according to, let's say, scholarship might have been the early, let's say, the last century or 2 before Jesus appeared, BC, what do we call it now, BCE? And I won't go into the whole thing about writing in India. I'll suffice to say, in the Mahabharata and in the Bhagavad Purana, Bhagavatam, no one ever writes anything, actually. There's no writing. The famous Hindu story about Vyas dictating, Ganesh writing appears to be a famous Hindu story. Because if you actually look at the all the different recensions of Mahabharata, very, very few of them even mention it. And there's no other writing. No one ever writes anything else in the Mahabharata. The Bhagavatam, no one writes anything. And so, in this case, Shastra and scholarship, modern scholarship, kind of agree. So assuming it was an oral tradition for some time, if you agree with Aryabhatta, the great Indian astronomer, one of the founders of trigonometry, which means very bright, we're definitely talking about 800 on his SAT math. Anyway, a very, very bright guy. He has lunar craters named after him and technology schools in India. He's got everything named after him. But he actually, through archaeoastronomy, which means he looked at ancient descriptions in the Mahabharata of constellations, the zodiac, basically the positions of stars, and he calculated when would the night sky have looked like that. And you could say, well, that's easy. You could just backdate it. You could just, But the problem is the problem of precession, which means that as the constellations go around, it's not completely regular. It actually shifts over time. And Western science didn't know that until, much later than Aryabhatta. And therefore, in other words, the description of the night sky could actually be the description of the night sky. When Krishna appeared, Shastra can't always be, ridiculously mythological and fictional. So if it's true, if the description really is a description of the night sky, Krishna appeared about 5,120 years ago, or whatever the number is, something like that. So, but then again, you have the Mahabharata written down maybe about 2,000 years ago. So the text isn't really fixed, isn't really frozen until it's written down. And even when it was written down, it was written in all the different alphabets of India, which people didn't communicate with each other so much. To give you one example, if you look at the Mahabharata recensions, basically you can divide them into the northern and southern recensions. It's, that India north-south divide that you see in so many things. So here's an example. When the great Vedic sage Parashara Muni, wants to cross a river in a boat, the Jamuna River, and the young boat girl is incredibly beautiful. So he gets in the boat, and he basically, the North Indian Mahabharata just says, what does it say? Such a kamatam. He desired her in the serious sense of the word. He desired her, and then he says, okay, let's, please do it with me. She's afraid she's going to get a whopping Vedic curse. Curses can really do terrible things to you. So she doesn't want to refuse, but she does say, with all due respect, oh great sage, there's all kinds of people on both sides of the river watching us. So no problem. He has this Hollywood fog machine. And so he just sort of enshrouds. They go to an island in the middle of the river, Dvipa. The whole thing is enshrouded in fog. He begets Vyasa, who becomes Dvaipayana, island-born. But anyway, so in the North Indian Mahabharata, you get this very brief description. He wanted her. He told her, let's just do it. She said, not in public. And he said, no problem, I can privatize this. But what's interesting is that you can imagine the suttas, the reciters, the wandering bards, or people who recited Mahabharata. They go down to very conservative South India, which I call it the buckle on the Veda belt. And it's interesting that you have this very conservative religion in South India for the same reason you find these born-again conservative religious people in Southeast United States. And that is geographic isolation. All the immigration that came into America came through basically New York, all kinds of people, and then from Asia it all came in through California. People didn't come in through the Southeast. And therefore they weren't exposed to other cultures. They were, what's the opposite of cosmopolitan? Local-politan or something. And therefore you get this sort of geographically isolated community that they only talk to each other. It's also not industrialized, it's very agricultural. and so on and so forth. And so you get these very conservative views. So in South India, just imagine a sutta wandering down there and saying, okay, the great Vedic sage Parashara wanted to cross a river, incredibly beautiful boat girl. He wanted her, and so on, and to throw the bum out. You can't tell us down here that an avatar is born out of wedlock. So you just, that was like, you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that in South India. So what happens? Look at the South Indian Mahabharata. Parashara meets Satyavati, proposes to her. They have a huge Hindu wedding. It goes on forever. And what I call the cosmic village all comes. Like you have the idea of a global village. So in these ancient texts, there's a cosmic village in the sense that the great, the demigods, even the great asuras or the sages, the Gandharvas, the Yakshas, the Kinnaras, everyone shows up. And they all know each other, even the great human kings, and they actually all know each other. And because they all go to the same cosmic social events. Great sacrifices, great weddings. So the cosmic village shows up at the wedding, and they get married, and then Vyasa is born in wedlock. He's not, as they used to say in England, I don't know if they still say it, a natural child, like a natural daughter, a natural son. You find that in Jane Austen, which is a nice way of saying your parents weren't married. So the reason I mention that is because there are regional variations, and Madhvacharya is not just making all this up. Just one more quick example. There's a famous verse that we actually quoted in a GBC paper we wrote. Okay, no jokes. And I did the Sanskrit, I translated the Sanskrit for this paper. It was a time in ISKCON's history where all kinds of important gurus had spiritual problems, to say the least. And therefore you had hundreds and hundreds of ISKCON devotees sort of who had lost their guru. What do we do with these people? And so the question arose, what do you do if your guru falls down? And, should you reject the guru? Do you take another guru? So anyway, we had to write a paper on that. At what point it was a burning issue in ISKCON. So when I was doing the research, to find some type of Shastric evidence or word of Acharyas and translating it from Sanskrit, and we found this verse which was kind of like the killer, in the sense of, this verse definitely shows that if one's guru falls down, take another guru, or one should reject a fallen guru. And the verse is actually from Mahabharata. And it was spoken by Bhishma to his guru, his military guru, Parashuram. His name means kind of like axe pleasure. He took pleasure in using his axe, Parashuram. So the verse goes, Gurora pi, even in the case of a guru, Gurora pi, avaliptasya, even a guru, if he's become contaminated, Karya majanata, not knowing right from wrong, like what to do, what not to do. Utpatang pratipannasya, and who has taken to a deviant path, utpatang pratipannasya, parityagami diyate. It is enjoined, rejection of that guru is enjoined. So we use that, but what I find interesting is that in other recensions, more conservative parts of India, the first 3 parts of that sloka are the same, but the last line is, you should still follow him. Because it's not just these kinds of details, you get different versions of stories, but in any case, the idea that the Mahabharata has been affected by history, that as an oral transmission, as an oral text, it being gigantic, that inevitably regional differences developed and so on. And Madhvacharya says that by our time, and he's talking 800 years ago, he calls the text thoroughly corrupted. So one example, which I consider to be a text interpolation or corruption, there's many, and I'll give you my logic for it, is precisely this ubiquitous character trait in Mahabharata, that Krishna is kind of like a serial conniver. He's always tricking someone, he's always lying to someone, always cheating someone. And I'll tell you why I think that is not authentic, in my view. First of all, I will say that Krishna, who's like the serial trickster, is not at all the Krishna that I hear in Bhagavad Gita. I mean, when you listen to Krishna's voice in Bhagavad Gita, it's a very different voice. It's actually, and it's known for this. I mean, he's calm, rational, persuading, emphasizing the importance of being straightforward, of being honest, and being so himself in the Gita. So where does this serial trickster or cheater or liar come from? And I'll give you my analysis of it, because I think Krishna actually, that's not actually how Krishna behaved. And the Bhagavatam, by the way, if the Mahabharata is corrupted from our point of view within the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, the Bhagavatam is not a corrupted text. In fact, many scholars have pointed this out. It does not have the features of a corrupted text. It has a type of literary and even theological integration. But in any case, if you look at the history of Krishna Bhakti in India, and specifically at the history of cultural manifestations in terms of poetry, in terms of theater, visual arts, sculpture, and all that. Like, how has India historically glorified or depicted Krishna in culture? And here I'm referring to a point made by an old friend of mine who known as Edwin Bryant, now teaches at Rutgers. And he published with Penguin Press a translation of the 10th canto. So the points I'm making come from his introduction to his 10th canto translation, that if you actually look at the history of artistic or cultural or literary depiction of Krishna in India, Hindus were almost exclusively attracted to or concerned with Krishna and Vrindavan. It's really, there's very little artistic expression in all the arts of, Krishna Kurukshetra, despite Bhagavad Gita, Krishna Mathura. It's really almost all about Krishna and Vrindavan. And if you look at Krishna and Vrindavan, they love the idea of stealing butter, or stealing the garments of the gopis, or all these like tricks and all this stuff, which is appropriate for a child. You can do things as a kid you can't get away with as an adult. So, but I believe what happened, and I'm actually acting within epistemological boundaries that Prabhupada personally gave me. And that is that somehow or other, in the process of the corruption of the Mahabharata text, which Madhavacharya says, explicitly talks about, that this trickster Krishna as a child was kind of like recycled into the adult Krishna, because they wanted the trickster Krishna, the one who's lies or cheats, who sneaks out at night with the gopis. And so if you look at the Battle of Kurukshetra, for example, Bhishma killed by a trick, Drona killed by a trick, Karna killed by a trick, Jayadratha, not a great general, but a contender, Jayadratha killed by a trick. It's like, are we ever going to see a real fight here? Imagine all the people who were there, pay-per-view people might have wanted their money back, because this is my view. I'm not saying you have to think this, but my own view is that they actually had real fights, and certain people won and certain people lost. For example, Karna, deprived of his chariot, one of Krishna's great tricks. Actually, if you read the unabridged battle scenes of Mahabharata, losing your chariot was not a big deal, because there are many scenes where someone's chariot's destroyed and they just get off their chariot and keep fighting. It's not like, oh my God, curtains, I'm done for, I lost my chariot. It's really not like that. In fact, some fighters like Bhima prefer to get off their chariot. He kind of likes to be on the ground and smash people from the ground. And so he sometimes just gets off his chariot. He'd rather fight on the ground. So then look at the curse of Karna. For example, look at the curse of Karna. Curses tend to be quid pro quo. It's like, for example, look at Dasharatha. Dasharatha, hunting accident, lots of hunting accidents in these literatures. So Dasharatha accidentally kills a Brahmin boy who's the only emotional and economic support for his elderly Brahmin parents. Basically, their life is over when they lost their child. So they curse Dasharatha that just as we are now dying of grief because we've lost our son, you will die of grief when you lose your son. And so you see this quid pro quo, even in the cursing in the Bhagavatam of Parikshit. Parikshit insulted a Brahmana. You know, you insulted me with a snake, now a snake will literally come back to bite you. Pandu killed accidentally, another hunting accident, which the obvious point is to discourage hunting without formally legislating against it. So Pandu, he accidentally kills a Brahmin couple this young Brahmin couple had performed so many austerities that by the time they decided to beget a child, they were, in modern parlance, frigid. You know, they couldn't do it because of like so many austerities. So they thought, well, deer seem to have a, sort of a savoir-faire. Deer seem to be very enthusiastic about begetting, so let's take on the bodies of deers and, beget our child. So Pandu, unknowing, kills them. And so, it's a horrible scene. He shoots these deer. They let out this horrible human shriek, which you could imagine, how Pandu felt. And then the male Brahmin says that I will not curse you for killing a Brahmana because we were in disguise. But your offense is that you killed creatures in the act of begetting. And the act of begetting is sacred, and therefore that's your offense, that you never attack creatures who are in the act of begetting, and therefore you will die in the act of begetting. The reason I bring all these up is it's funny, the word for curse in Sanskrit is shop, so I say, shop till you drop, but But the reason I bring this up is because you see this very symmetric quid pro quo. You do this, you get that. The punishment fits the crime. Now consider karna. Okay, you accidentally killed a Brahmin, your chariot wheel will get stuck in the mud. Excuse me? So, but anyway, so that's an example of this. Now in the Mahabharata itself, the issue comes up of destiny over free will. And the Sanskrit words that are used are daiva, from the word deva, obviously. In other words, sort of providence, like God's will or the will of the gods. So that's daiva, or purushakara, literally like personal action. Personal action. What really matters is does it matter what we do, or is everything just providence and destiny? So and again, I got this from Professor Van Buiten, and I thought it was a really good point. He felt, and I actually agree with him now, although when I first read it, being a younger devotee, I thought, he was, that was horribly offensive, but I actually think he's right. Because, to me, when I was young, Mahabharata, Shastra, don't even think about critiquing it. But what Van Buiten says is that the story, in a sense, for him, he's just saying for him, he's, what's a good story for him, is kind of spoiled a bit, because everything depends on curses and boons. So hardly anyone ever really does anything. I mean, everything is just curses and boons, rather than people just getting out there and going at it. And so to me, I mean, it's possible that when the Mahabharata was written down, there was a kind of fatalism in India, which is reflected in the text. So I've covered the part about the mischievous, the sort of uber mischievous Krishna, and also this point about, I think the real story is not just curses and boons. I mean, to give one example of Krishna tricking, which I think is just like, I think it doesn't make sense. And of course, we can bring in the apologetics team and try to say, no, it's really perfect, because I think it just really doesn't work. And that is the killing of Abhimanyu, which, of course, I mean, the typical Hindu take on this, or, devotee take on this, is that, first of all, he was just a young kid. This is so cruel. Why are you attacking this young boy? Secondly, you ganged up on him. You're all fighting together. This is like totally unfair. But let's look at the facts. I mean, first of all, Abhimanyu, this, innocent young boy who no one should aim a weapon at, was basically slaughtering the Kuru army. So it's like, okay, he's killing like thousands of people. Yeah, he's just a kid, I mean, let him have a little fun. No, actually, they had to stop him. Secondly, this idea that it was so unfair to gang up on Abhimanyu. Well, guess if you read the unabridged battle scenes in Mahabharata, everyone does that. It's like a standard, constant technique. The Pandavas gang up on Bhishma, like all 5 of them. So ganging up is just, everybody does it all the time. Like the professor said, they meet at the beginning and go, okay, like in a boxing match, okay, no hitting below the belt. When I say break, I want a clean break, all that. So they actually meet at the beginning of the battle and they agree on all that. And as the professor said, it lasts around, on the outside, 10 minutes. I know the first rule I think that gets broken is that they agree that you can't attack a charioteer. Just attack the soldiers, not the charioteers. In like the first 20 minutes of the fight, charioteers are going down like flies. So, just to wrap this up, so what I'm doing, I'm working on the Mahabharata. The genre I've chosen is the historical novel, because I don't want to call it the Mahabharata, because it's not just a translation, it's not even a summary. It's really me trying to figure out what happened. So, one quick example. Jayadratha. Pandavas realize that Arjuna's son is in danger. They desperately go to save him. They have to break into this sort of impenetrable vyuha, battle formation. Jayadratha cashes in his boon from Lord Shiva. And, one time he can defeat all the Pandavas, and so he keeps them all out, and Abhimanyu's killed. Now, look at Arjuna's reaction. First of all, Arjuna's first reaction is perfectly understandable. He's heartbroken, he's grieving, he's outraged, and so on. But, and here's the funny part, he vents, or he focuses all of his rage, like 100% of it, on Jayadratha. He actually has no anger at all toward the people that actually killed his son. Like, oh, well, that's okay. I'm not mad at you guys. They're the ones that actually killed his son. No anger. It's only Jayadratha. So if you're just kind of immersed in this culture and you're just reading the story, you don't think about it. But if you approach this as, this issue, which is, did this Mahabharata really happen? Of course, no one, by academic, let's say, scholarship, you can't really answer that question. What really happened, because none of us were there. But why only Jayadratha? What about the people that killed your son? What about... I don't think there is a good answer. I think it's just a case where there's something wrong with the text. And again, if you think I'm saying improper things, I have my shield is Madhvacharya, who said it, the text is like that. So if you look at the Bhagavatam, you don't find these things. Very interestingly, if you look at the Bhagavatam, and compare the difference between the Bhagavatam and Mahabharata, telling the same stories, there's all kinds of differences. And just in terms of chronology, so you know what's going on, the two narrations overlap, but the Bhagavatam emphasizes, for obvious reasons, Krishna Bhakti, Krishna's early life. So the Bhagavatam 10th canto ends, the last stories of Krishna Leela in the 10th canto are, for example, Krishna killing Shalva, who had this, that was really an airplane, I think. We had this discussion, remember? So Shobha, but as the professor said, it wasn't like a Boeing, what do they call it? Airbus. It wasn't like an airplane, it was like a city, and so on. But, so after the killing of Shalva, and then, a few of Shalva's friends go crazy and attack Krishna, and they go down too. And then after that, that's sort of the end of the 10th canto. It kind of wraps up with a few chapters. But that killing of Shalva is very early in the Mahabharata story, although it's the end of the 10th canto. For example, when Krishna and Draupadi, the great Draupadi, meet in the Mahabharata, and Draupadi says, when I was being offended in the Duty Sabha, the gambling hall of the Kurus, why didn't you come? And I prayed, where were you? And Krishna says, of course I should have come, but I was in Dwarka because Shalva attacked Dwarka, and I had to defend my city. So that means that the gambling match, which is again fairly early on in the Mahabharata, is the end of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. And I think I can give the reason for this very, very quickly. Just like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's Adi Leela, Madhya Leela, and Antya Leela, beginning, middle, and end. There also isn't a 10th canto without that terminology. So the first Leela, you could call it Adi Leela, the first stage of Krishna Leela is Krishna in Vrindavan, which exactly corresponds to Chaitanya and Navadvip. Intimate with your own people, family, and all that. Then the middle stage of Mahabharata is when Krishna leaves Vrindavan and goes out to fight. He leaves Vrindavan and he has to go out and actually engage in major political, military activities in the world, not just be a cowherd boy. And that is, it's that first period in Vrindavan and the middle period that the 10th canto actually talks about. After that, at a certain point, after killing Shalva and his friends, Krishna and Balaram retire from personal combat. Exactly as Lord Chaitanya, in the middle part of his life, he went around and personally preached, which is kind of like the equivalent of Krishna's fighting. And then just as Lord Chaitanya stopped personally traveling and preaching in Antya Leela and just did his own thing in Puri, so Krishna retires from personally fighting and sort of passes the baton to his disciples, or his devotees, such as the Pandavas and the Yadavas. So therefore the Mahabharata, because it's focusing on the Pandavas, really gets going precisely at the time when the Pandavas kind of like take the baton from Krishna, and now they will fight the Asuras, and the Yadavas from Dwarka will fight the Asuras. So, anyway, I don't even know what I meant. I forgot I mentioned that. I better stop. But so in my own presentation of Mahabharata, which I'm doing as a historical novel, so I won't mislead people into thinking that it's a translation or a summary, I'm basically trying to, as a historian, now I will, promote myself in a sort of a shameless way and claim, as all, that I'm actually doing something which hasn't been done so much before. And so here's my point. This is not really self-promotion. I'm just trying to describe what I'm doing. And that is, basically, I think the Mahabharata has been presented in two different ways in the world. And that is within the faith tradition, this is all Shastra, this is what happened, read it, enjoy it. And the other way is you could say the Western academic method, although of course it's not only in the West, it's all over the world. And that is, sort of critical scholarship, and we don't know if these events ever happened. I know one of my Sanskrit teachers when I was undergraduate at UCLA, Professor Sharfa, Hartmut Sharfa, he said, I don't think any of these things even happened. I don't think there was a battle of Kurukshetra. But anyway, that's no hard feelings, he has a right to his view. But still, it's that question, radically question the historicity and basically reject the historicity of supernatural events. You reject the historicity of anything which isn't empirically easily explainable. Was there a Krishna? You find this in standard textbooks. You find the standard textbooks in Hinduism, like who wrote the Gita? Obviously Krishna didn't write it. Wrote it. Whoops. Who spoke the Gita? Obviously Krishna didn't. On the Indology conference, Professor and I are both on this conference, and I had an interesting experience. I don't know if you caught that one, but every course you'll ever take in your life on the history of Hinduism, when they cover the Gita, they'll say it must be later than Buddhism, because I think 3 times or whatever, 3 or 5 times, you find the term Brahma Nirvana in Brahma. And so because Nirvana is a Buddhist word, and since the Gita is taking a Buddhist word, it must be later than Buddhism, therefore it must be at the oldest, the first few centuries before Jesus. So I wrote a letter to the Indology conference, which is, all the top scholars, really, most of the top scholars in the world from all the best schools. And I said, logically, not historiographically, but logically, there are 3 possibilities. Namely that Buddha got it from Krishna, Krishna got it from Buddha, or simultaneous, independent, good ideas. And there's logically, so I said, do we have any serious evidence, scholarly evidence, academic evidence, that definitely Krishna took it from Buddha rather than vice versa, or number 3? And there was no answer. Literally, and I don't want to bash the Indology conference, but I'm just saying, here you have hundreds and hundreds of really excellent scholars, very, very good scholars, who probably all teach that the Gita is later than Buddhism because it has the word nirvana, yet no one had ever thought about, well, how do we know that? And there was no answer. And there was one professor, I'm sorry I forgot his name, but he's from England.
Zena, this recent, was it?
Yeah, it wasn't Zena, yeah. I wish I remembered that, but he was a very, very nice gentleman. And he wrote in and said, yeah, it's a good point. And so, So I guess what I'm getting at here is that, so there's been the academic method, which is very skeptical about almost everything. But again, serious scholarship, intelligent people being very logical and rigorous within their own ground rules. It's like if you play cricket, there are certain rules, like this is a fair ball and a foul. Do you say fair and foul? Yes, okay. No, anyway, American baseball. Let's take something which is, more widely known in England, American baseball. So, but if you hit the ball here, it's, you get it counts. If you hit the ball there, it doesn't. Now, those aren't absolute standards. There's no, I think, absolute platonic form of cricket. It's just that a bunch of human beings made up some rules, and according to those rules, it is or it isn't. To some extent, I don't want to say that all the rules of academic scholarship are arbitrary like cricket rules. Many of the rules are, I think, reasonable, logical, and they're just objectively a good way to do scholarship. At the same time, I think some rules are not. I think some rules reflect the highly agnostic, general atmosphere in academia. That's a whole other topic. I have all kinds of blockbuster arguments, but never mind. But what I mean to say is there's been the faith presentation of Mahabharata. This is Shastra, and therefore every word is true. Or scholarship, which, at times is respectful and all that, but basically very skeptical. So what I'm doing, and this is, I think, something which I haven't seen before, maybe just because I don't read enough, but anyway, what I'm doing is I am within the tradition, obviously. I'm obviously within the Vaishnava tradition, despite some Vaishnava critics. I'm actually still within the Vaishnava tradition. And yet at the same time, I am using, and glad to use, the tools of serious academic historiography. And so it's kind of a hybrid. I'm obviously not just a regular academic historian, because I'm within the tradition. But at the same time, I'm not just within the tradition. I take seriously, the historic method, the method of scholars. And so what I'm doing is, in this hybrid, is I assume, and this is based on my own, this is a spiritual claim I'm making. This is not an academic claim. It's a spiritual claim, obviously based on my own experiences. That basically the story really happened. Not all the details. I think lots of the details need to be looked at. But I think if you look at the Bhagavatam gives, in a sense, a much more sober account. It leaves out, Krishna doesn't lie and cheat in the Bhagavatam at Kurukshetra, which is interesting. He doesn't do that. The offense to Draupadi is told in a very different way. The life of Parikshit is told in a very different way. There's all kinds of things, but so I'm staying as a member of a spiritual community who I believe I made a rational choice to believe certain things based on my own experiences and the principle of self-evident truth, which is found in Aristotle and in Lord Chaitanya and in modern epistemology. But based on all that, so I'm staying within the boundaries of the Bhagavatam. And yet, within those boundaries, I'm taking a very critical, you could say, academic, historical look at the text we have today, and sort of liberated by Madhvacharya, by saying the text is very corrupt, I'm trying to reconstruct what might have happened. I don't claim this is what happened. You know, even I'm not that proud. I don't claim this is what happened. I'm simply saying that like one of my, let's say, assumptions, one of my assumptions is these were real people, and therefore they probably did what real people do in situations like that. And therefore, if I get a story where they do something which no real person would ever do in that situation, I take another look at it. Like, I don't think a real person, upon hearing that his son was killed, would feel nothing, not a slightest twinge of anger toward the people that killed his son, and would only be angry at the person that kept the door locked. I don't think a real person would do that. And therefore, anyway, but that's enough. So that's basically what I'm doing the Mahabharata. Within the boundaries of the Bhagavatam, but since a great Acharya says Mahabharata is thoroughly corrupted, within those Bhagavatam boundaries, trying to reconstruct what real people would do in various situations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'd just like to ask Dermot if he could respond, and then we'll open up the discussion for any questions or comments.
Yes, I can't respond at great length to all that, but yes, thank you. And I do agree that the idea that Brahma-Nirvana shows that the Gita is post-Buddhistic is a very poor bit of evidence indeed. One of my teachers, R.C. Zaina.
Oh, he was your teacher.
In his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, he makes a great deal of this Brahma-Nirvana business, and I found it quite unconvincing. Yeah. But you might as well say that Brahma is a Brahmanical word and not a Buddhist word, so if Buddhists use it, it must be because they got it from Bhagavad Gita. It seems to be just as good as an argument. But yes, and there's the contrast between the Bhagavata Purana and the Mahabharata as not only their attitude to Krishna, but the kind of texts they are. It's a very sharp contrast indeed, because the Bhagavata Purana is a remarkably stable text, much more stable than most Puranas. I've been able to look up quotations in the Bhagavatam from the 19th century and find that in a modern edition they have exactly the same chapter and verse numbers, which with any other Purana wouldn't be like. It takes ages to trace a quotation. Whereas the Mahabharata is by nature a fluid text. And there are recensions all over India which differ, and you know, V.S. Thakur's edition, the apparatus on each page is about 4 times the size of the text because there's so many variants. And that's because it was the kind of text which is recited by sutras by bards, and bards like to do things a bit differently from other bards just to show that they're proper bards who don't just recite what they've heard before. But I don't believe that that's because it's an oral text, because all texts can be orally transmitted and yet be very rigid. The Vedic texts are orally transmitted, but they're orally transmitted by a very circumscribed and laborious method in which teachers have to recite the text to pupils, and pupils recite them back to teachers until they've got them exactly right. And it's a very time-consuming method. But it's worth doing, because if you believe in the Veda, you believe that every syllable has to be pronounced exactly as it has always been pronounced. And it was the same with the Buddhist sutras. They were transmitted very accurately because the Buddhist monks spent all their time reciting sutras. So it's not because it's an oral text, it's because it's that kind of oral text that the Mahabharata is very fluid. But the Mahabharata is so fluid that there are sections of the Mahabharata which don't contain the Bhagavad Gita at all. And V.S. Thakur reports that because he was a good textual scholar, although he says in his own, when he's writing independently, that the Bhagavad Gita is the heart's heart of the Mahabharata. But he knew that Mahabharata didn't always contain it. It's interesting, the Bhagavad Gita couldn't exist without the Mahabharata because it presupposes the story of the Mahabharata, and the context of situation wouldn't be there for the Bhagavad Gita to make sense. But the Mahabharata can exist without the Bhagavad Gita, and sometimes does. Yeah. So I'd be interested to see your historical novel, faith-based, historically critical interpretation when it comes out. Yeah. Are there any questions on what Radhananda has said?
I'm not a scholar, and
You're a doctor.
well, I was a doctor. What I can't really understand, the whole ISKCON philosophy, I understand, it is a devotional philosophy, Bhakti Marga, that's what they said. Before I left India, we used to hear so many stories and so many writings, read so many writings and lots of contradictions about Ramayana, Mahabharata, Purana, and all that was there. I thought that the whole thing was a junk. And it was so confusing. But after I came over here, and still, it's very difficult to communicate with the Indians because each one has got a prefixed ideas about regional understanding. But after coming over here, I read about Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita and then Bhagavata, Chaitanya Charitamrita. There is no contradictions, no any issues, and it was very clean and clear to follow the Bhakti Marga. But once you inject these the Puranas and the Ramayana, Mahabharata and all that, I find that it is deviating from the whole concept about the Bhakti Marga, because I don't find Bhakti Marga in Mahabharata. There are so many contradictions you yourself accepted, and you are saying about how Krishna intervened in different people's killing. It's a very well-known question. In India, they ask why he was killed, why he was killed, why Krishna didn't take measures, why Krishna intervened, all this. But there's nothing to do bhakti. Why I don't understand why importance is started giving about Mahabharata in the Bhakti Marga. Please, I'm sorry if I'm a bit so bold in asking you.
No, that was
forgive me.
That was pretty moderate.
You will wait for the verse now.
Oh yeah. So, good question. The Mahabharata was meant to be, as it's described in the Bhagavatam, really the people's book, so to speak. The people's book. It was for people in general. If you look at the Bhagavatam, the Amalam Puranam, which is really in a class by itself in many ways. The structure of it is, there's a tremendous focus on rather complex and sophisticated theology. So that, for example, to give one very typical example, taking the fourth canto, we have the narration of Bhakta Dhruva, the young boy Dhruva. And of course, the story of Dhruva is always used by the Vaishnavas as an illustration of the fact that people in general approach God with material desires, as Krishna says, Chaturvidha bhajante mam, and so on. But that once you really experience Krishna, you realize how foolish it was to approach him for anything except bhakti. So Dhruva's that story is always cited. For example, in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami, he always cites that story, and always for that particular theological point. So if you look at the structure, the literary structure of that story in the fourth canto of Dhruva, the actual narration, talking about what really happened, it's actually told very briefly. We know, for example, that Dhruva was a 5-year-old boy. His father had a co-wife. The names of the two wives really are very descriptive, because the other sort of the I don't want to say evil, but the typical story you find, the evil stepmother, or the Suruchi literally means very appealing in the kind of graphic sense, very appealing. And Dhruva's mother was Suniti, like very ethical. And so their names kind of say it all. So Dhruva wants to climb in his father's lap. He wants his father's love, but his father is sort of, caressing the other son, the son of the wife that he likes much more. He pushes Dhruva away. Dhruva's rejected by his father. He's furious, and he walks out of the... He goes to his mother. She says, don't take it so seriously, but he leaves. He just walks out. He meets Narada Muni, and Narada tests him, Guru Pariksha tests him, like, hey, you're just a 5-year-old kid. I mean, what do you care about all this stuff for, Because he says he wants his own kingdom. So what I'm saying is the actual narration is very, very brief. But when he goes with his mother, she preaches to him. So you get this theology. And then when he meets Narada, we're not even told where he met Narada, how he met Narada. We're not even told how he got out of the city. Because I'm sure back then, just as now, 5-year-old kid can't just walk out of the city and no one says anything. People don't let 5-year-old children just walk out of the city into the wilderness. How did he get away? We don't hear any of this. It's a very, very brief narration. But once he meets Narada, then Narada starts preaching to him. Then you get this long section of serious theology. And then another short little narrative, just a few verses. He goes to Madhuvan, Vrindavan area. He begins to perform these ferocious austerities. And finally, Krishna appears to him. So then you have Krishna speaking to him, more theology. He responds to Krishna, more theology. So if you just look at and this is a very typical story, where at least half the story is just sort of this advanced, complex Vaishnava theology, and the actual narration it's almost like sets up the theology. And so obviously, how many people in England today, or how many people in America, don't even ask. How many people in these modern countries, for their own pleasure or interest, go to buy theology books? It's hardly anybody. No one reads. Who reads theology? Theologians, maybe, that's about it. And yet, the Bhagavatam is a highly theological work. And it assumes it's constantly glorifying Krishna. So that's a pretty heavy dose for people who aren't really committed to Krishna. The theology is too much. The Krishna bhakti is too much. So if you take a teleological approach, that actually great souls, Krishna himself, Vyasa, sort of Narada kind of designed this corpus to try to help people in this age, then you have another book, Mahabharata, which number one, doesn't have as much Krishna. So if you can only take your, God in small doses, that's too much God, then in the Mahabharata, you get much smaller doses of God. And if you take out the original kind of like, if you take out the serial trickster, cheater, conniver, then you do get a Krishna consistent with Bhagavad Gita, but much smaller doses. Another thing, Mahabharata gets much more in just history. You have sustained narration. There practically is no sustained narration in the Bhagavatam. I mean, you never go that many verses without a big chunk of serious theology. And so you don't get, I mean, imagine if, let's say, when Star Wars came out and you see like 5 minutes, well, the first 15 minutes are just the spaceship going overhead. I'm kidding. But anyway, so let's say you went to see Star Wars and there's like 5 minutes of action, and then someone comes on and says, let's talk about the intricate details of literary technique and storytelling, and you know, what would Joseph Campbell say about this? And because George Lucas actually studied with Joseph Campbell to write the book, you know, the hero's journey. But I mean, you know, you couldn't sell movie tickets like that. I mean, you know, the director's own wife might not go to see it. So the Bhagavatam has all this very serious, at times very complex, heavy theology. It's very interesting. It's intellectually interesting, but and so because of that, you don't have sustained narration. Whereas in the Mahabharata, you don't have theology. You know, occasionally get prayers. And the professor also noted that, you know, suttas are wandering around. Like, let's say you're a sutta and you're wandering around. And let's face it, this is what you do for a living. You know, you narrate Mahabharata. And so let's say you go to Southeast India, maybe to the Chola kingdom. And let's say it's a particular time when the king is this heavy, sort of fanatical Shaiva Bhakta. In fact, perhaps the same one who blinded one of the followers of Ramanuja because he was a Vaishnava. So, I mean, India in general was tolerant, was you know, liberal, but you get dark moments in history. So if you go into that kingdom and the king says, hey, if you want to narrate Mahabharata here, you better come up with a really nice chapter on, you know, Mahadeva and Shiva. Sure, no problem. I can do that. Totally doable. So, you know, there's all kinds of, or for example, someone's telling a story and people love it so much, tell it again tomorrow night, but, you know, we want to hear more, so I haven't got more. Okay, well, here's some more details. And there's all kinds of pressures, sectarian and narrative and so on. But still, the Mahabharata is basically continuous narration. You can go on and on and on, and it's just the story. There's no theological interruptions. You get very small doses, like little tiny spoon-sized doses of God. And so it's the people's book. It's for people in general. And so, in answer to your question, I mean, obviously you're not, you know, obviously you have an education, obviously you're a thinker, and therefore you can handle theology. You know, it's not going to ruin your day. But for people in general, if all this is true, it is necessary to come up, like for the Mahabharata to fulfill its original purpose, to come up with a plan to sort of, you know, to make it appealing to the modern world.
It was brilliant what you said. Totally, you know, I would not term this as the radical side, but you mentioned it. I didn't do that, you know. So there are some things which I totally agree, and some things which I disagree. I start with something which I disagree with. Because as we are in a scientific platform, you know, you always have a scope to also argue, you know. So
I wouldn't know.
Yes, because the extrapolations, what you spoke about in the text, you know, we all know why it happened. There are also reasons for it, logical reasons. Number one is invasion. So number two is politics. The kings wanted to keep everyone, you know, listening and not everyone being chaotic. So it's a kind of an organized, functional democracy based on authority. So, but based totally on authority. We all think it's democracy, but nearly not. Like what we live now in England, you know, we all think it's democracy, but not. You know, so the extrapolations, the interpolations in the language was necessary at some stage, you know, to keep all the rulers out. You know, so we had a lot of invasion in India, quite a lot. You take any country, India is the worst, you know. So and from different religions, from different perspective of belief system.
Okay, I would suggest that interesting theory, by the way, you just put forward.
Yes.
and being probably at least as argumentative as you, I'll just reply, and that is, I believe that like the examples I gave of pressures on the text really don't involve foreign cultures.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve, but there was something happened. We don't know what happened. But
However, yes, but like in the, for example, Shaiva king or a Shakta king or whatever, that has really very little to do with nothing to do with foreign invasions. As far as like the trickster Krishna, I don't really agree that if you look at Indian history, you have these sort of all-knowing sages who are just kind of looking down on Indian history and saying, okay, we now need to move the civilization 5 degrees to the right to prevent some really bad thing from happening. Okay, 2 degrees to the left, and they're just kind of, in a completely rational, objective way. I think what's really happening is that India, like every other place in the world, was just subjected to all kinds of historical forces, and people had purposes, they had interests, and they had preferences. And the example I gave of, kind of recycling butter thief Krishna, Makhan Chor, and so suddenly, right in the middle of the Battle of Kurukshetra, in walks the butter thief, who's just always tricking, or in walks, the person that stole the gopis' garments. And so I don't think that's really about all-knowing sages acting for the good of the civilization. I think it's just, people producing literature, producing art, producing sculpture, producing theater that's going to sell. That the people want. It's like, people, we want this. So, sing that song. That's a song we like. If you're a singer and every time you sing one song, everyone goes to sleep and walks out, another song, they stand up and cheer, that's the song you're going to sing. So I think it's just normal historical forces which were not necessarily divinely guided.
Yes, but we had, I'm not talking about external invasions, you talk South India, so, because I come from a South Indian perspective, it doesn't mean that, there's quite a lot of offense going on in that section, but if you take Krishna as a central point in South India, I think Krishna is not even spoken in South India. It's Mahavishnu, so because they don't want Krishna to be here as a cheater or whatever it is, So because we are so conservative, we think, that would even, polish everything out of our mind, and we'll be directly in hell, if we just even think of Krishna being having 16,000 wives, So we were taught about only Mahavishnu. So, and no one even knew who was Radharani in South India. I think most of the people, even now, So.
Radharani, yes, but the Mahabharata was certainly popular in South India.
Yes, Mahabharata was popular, but on everything, because South Indians focused on character building more, so they wanted to place Mahabharata and take only the good characters out of it, and say that, okay, see Karna, and this is how you give charity, see Yudhishthir, this is how you do your dharma, so see Duryodhan, this is how you don't do things, So it was all just character building exercises, so, but it was not very spiritual, it was very religious aspect, but nothing spiritual onto it, because there is no understanding whatsoever on spirituality. But the one thing I disagree with you is curses and boons, because we also live in this current society with curse and boon.
How so?
You just take Northern Ireland as an example now. It's a boon for them because they are just giving
1 billion.
Yeah, 1 billion, and then it's support, So the local government or central government is getting support of 10 MPs with a boon of 1 billion.
Okay. Let me be more specific in how I'm using the words. I mean, this is shocking because I thought, unlike the American government, the British government was absolutely, pure. But by the way, it's actually a relief to be out of America right now because we're kind of, the leader now is a barbarian. But sorry. Anyway, so when I said curses and boons, I mean obviously the word boon in the dictionary can mean what you just said. I meant to say, and I'll say now, I meant boons from, higher powers, from devas, rather than just someone like, just gave me something. So, because even in the case of Ireland that you just mentioned, and I was aware of kind of like that deal, that it's human beings acting for their self-interest as they perceive it. So we still have a human story with human drama. Whereas in the Mahabharata, we don't emotionally bond with the devas because, you know, they don't really come to life for us. They just kind of show up to do this or that. And so in terms of the people on earth, the human beings, their actions are constantly sort of made to be inconsequential. Because like if two guys fight, you know, it's interesting, two guys are fighting, but it's not really them fighting, it's this curse against that boon against, you know, coming from people that we don't really know or care about. So that's how I think that's what Van Buiten meant, and I agree with it, kind of drains the story of its human appeal. So you don't disagree with it?
No, it's
I'd like to thank everybody for their kind attention, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our honoured guests today. If we could give a round of applause.
Oh, infomercial, my new book on Mahabharata. You didn't think that an American would come here and not try to sell you something, right?
How much is it?
Oh, for you, just take one as a gift.
Oh, thank you very much.
Also available on Amazon, if anyone doesn't get the chance today. And I'd like to invite everyone to stay around. Maharaj will be speaking again later, so if you weren't able to ask the questions that you had, then that opportunity is going to be there a little later. I'd like us just to take a few minutes to reset and then come back we'll only have half an hour for it now, but just to come back for our session for scholars in our midst to hear about the academic research that is going on in our community here in England. Yes.
Thank you very much.
There's refreshments next door if anyone wants to take some quickly and bring them back in with them. So we'll start again at 6 o'clock or a few minutes after, so please try and do that. Thank you.
No.